You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings, I'm Alan Weitz, and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. Today, my producer, John Harris, and I will be talking about photography. Not the nuts and bolts type of photography we usually banter about, but rather the aesthetics and photographic sensibilities expressed in Ocean of Images, New Photography 2015, a photographic exhibition on display at MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, through March 20th, 2016. Our guests today are Roxana Marcoci, Senior Curator at MoMA's Department of Photography, and Stephen Mays, Executive Director of the Tim Hetherington Trust, former CEO of Seven Agency, and an accomplished writer and media strategist. Welcome, Roxana. Welcome, Stephen. We're going to begin the show by having Roxana give us a little bit of a background about Ocean of Images, and then we're going to come back to Stephen and get his take on the show. Roxana, can you give us a brief history of the New Photography exhibit, and who are some of the more notable artists who have been introduced to us over the years?
Sure, with great pleasure. New Photography was launched in 1985 by John Charkovsky, who at the time was the director of the photography department. And one of John's idea was that we would implement a very robust program where we will have every year a small, focused exhibition that will showcase the work of 4 to 5 emerging, I would say, photographers who had already built a solid body of work. There weren't any such programs at the time, and the New Photography series became truly a pioneering series insofar as it was at the very crux of the contemporary program at the Museum of Modern Art. Interestingly, that has happened since 85 to today on an annual basis. Now, this year we have celebrated the 30th anniversary of the series. So henceforth, we will be making some changes, and the series will happen on a biannual basis. It will be larger. It has a much more international roster of artists, and it has a more curated point of view, I would say. A few years ago, I would say maybe 10 years ago, one of the New York art critics has noted that if we were to put together a shorthand history of the New Photography series, we would end up, in fact, with a history of contemporary photography. So we had shown photographers quite early in their career since 1985, about 100 international photographers. And I can happily give you a handful of examples. For instance, the very first edition in 85 showed the work of Judith Joy Ross. The second one in 86 introduced the work of Philip Lorca di Corsia. The third one, both Paul Graham and Thomas Roma were featured in it. And in New Photography 4, Mikkel Schmidt was presented in it, and so on and so forth.
Track record's good.
The record is really good. I mean, not all of them became as known as others, but I would say that overall it's a very impressive record of...
Would you say that prior to this iteration, it was more of an American set of photographers?
Yes, I mean the very first ones, they were exclusively American photographers.
Was that intentional, or just?
I mean, I cannot really speak for my predecessors, really, but. Sure. But I think that if you look at how the series developed, it went from being mostly American, mostly black and white photography, mostly photography that was matted and framed on the wall, to becoming very international at some point, more women included, artists from all over the globe. I think it had to do also with how photography. Well, when John really started this program, there wasn't any such program. no other museum was doing a similar program. Now they have proliferated at all the major institutions.
A lot of museums and galleries didn't even recognize photography as being an art form.
Well, so that's what at the time, you mean?
Yeah, back then,
yes,
sure.
Yes,
yeah.
for sure. I think that was one of the missions of John Charkowski to show how photography was an art form, and sometimes to the point where that sort of proclivity of his of so much putting photography at the forefront as an art form could have and has been also criticized. What was interesting at one point was that in 1998, New Photography 14, which was curated by Darcy Alexander. For the very first time, artists working with the photographic medium were presented in the series. And that kind of marked a shift in the presentation of the work, that both photographers and artists with the photographic medium, which at the time still was a very polarized field, maybe it still is today, they were presented in this series. So we started much more of sort of integrating those two.
What sort
fractions.
of artwork was being incorporated? So I'm assuming it sounds like we went from photographs on the wall to other
Not
medium.
only that, but there were really artists that were working across mediums, not exclusively in photography. That particular edition included the work of John Dunning, Olafur Eliasson, Rachel Harrison, and Sam Taylor Wood, for instance. So, Olafur Eliasson works in large-scale installations. He also has a number of very impressive photographic series. And Rachel Harrison is primarily known as a sculptor, and photography is sort of incorporated into her sculptural installations.
Well, in the show that is currently showing, the 30th exhibit, there are a lot of alternatives to straight prints. There are straight prints on the wall,
Right.
very conventional, but there's also other formats. How is Ocean of Images a departure from what we're calling the norm in terms of the past photo exhibits, and what was some of the criteria you used for selecting the artists?
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, the way that
Oh, by the way, I want to say I don't envy you the job of having to make all of those decisions. It couldn't be easy. Go ahead.
I envy myself, but that's okay. No, I think that it's actually a quite interesting process. And all the curators in the photography department, we meet, in fact, usually about this time of the year. And we bring to the table everything that we have researched over the past year, and sometimes over the previous year, and artists or photographers that we have followed sometimes for quite a few years. So we do PowerPoint presentations, and usually we look at about, for every new photography series, over 100 photographers or artists working with a photographic medium. And then the process is refined, and in this case, we have 19 artists and artist collectives. In the past, there were anywhere from 2 artists to, I think, 8 artists.
Would you say that in the case of this show, the theme of the show, or was the theme of the show established before you went to look for artists, or were you already you had ideas on who you wanted to include, and then the theme formed around that?
No, we didn't make any imposition on us with regard to the theme. That would be almost illustrating a concept, and I don't think that we work that way. We start from the work, really. We start from the artists that we like. So we bring them to the table, and then we try to see how they might work together, and also what do they share. And sometimes it may be a very formal, stylistic. That wasn't really the case here.
No, not at all.
It wasn't how similar they would be on a formal level, but what were the conceptual underpinnings that they shared. And I should say that the question also that we were posing ourselves with this exhibition was not just generally in a very generic way, like what is photography in the 21st century, but rather more critically, what is contemporary photo-based culture. So when we started asking that question, we immediately came across issues of connectivity, circulation of images, networks of information, and communications models. And we realized that, in fact, what unites this group of artists that we were interested in, and there were many others that we couldn't include, was this idea of the post-internet, that they were all part of a post-internet generation. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean that they are all working with or on the internet, but rather that they are making images, and their cultural production is made with an understanding, with a consciousness of the network or the system within which an image exists.
Do you think there's any photographers or artists working today that don't work within that or understand that system? Seems to me that it's so pervasive for anyone working in the media.
Perhaps it is pervasive now, especially since, the internet, even when we delink ourselves from the internet, it still persists as a mode of life and a mode of experiencing the world.
Is there an aesthetic difference between pre-internet and what we're calling now post-internet, as far as the images we're actually seeing on the walls being either hanging in frames or being projected or being sculpted into with wood or other materials into a 3D form? Is there actually a difference in the aesthetics between what was before we went online and what's now considered online?
Right. Well, I think that you tell me that. I mean, you are the viewer, and you would know how an exhibition like New Ocean of Images, it has a title, by the way. Previous editions didn't have a title. But how does it differ to other photography exhibitions that you have seen? And I think that it is that kind of an exhibition that shows the porosity, in fact, of photography, that photography is very fluid, that it is in flux, and that it can take different shapes. In fact, in this exhibition, you can experience it as a cut-out photographic sculpture, as a projection, as a zine, as a takeaway poster, as something that exists only in the internet, or as a publicity campaign.
How does that differ from, if you go back a couple of hundred years, a lot of painters and even sculptors used camera obscuras to basically project the basic image onto a canvas and paint it from that? Photography has been part of art before cameras per se came into being. Before you can go out and buy a Kodak camera and take pictures, photography, the concepts of photography, an image being projected onto a wall, was used in artwork for a long time. Isn't that are we talking about the same thing? Is it just a continuation of using this ethereal image and capturing it either as a tracing or as a physical print or a projection? Is there any real difference between all of that?
Well, that's a legitimate question. And I think to a certain degree, maybe we are in a pre-photographic moment. I mean, the camera obscura, and there are very interesting artists working with the camera obscura. Zoe Leonard, for instance, who creates actual cameras obscuras. She builds room-like environments where the photographic image, because it is a photographic image after all, is never pinned down. It's the anti-decisive moment, right? Where what you experience is only once. It's fluid. It's in flux. It's perpetually developmental. It's not a print. It's not something that is an object. It's a moving image of sorts. And I think that what's interesting about this, which brings us back to your question about this exhibition, is that this 24/7, image traffic that we are experiencing today, in fact, is not sui generis. And if you think about it, it goes back certainly at the beginning, not only of the medium, but it has different revivals. So I don't know if it's a continuation, but it might be a disruption of what we know as being a photograph. What is the photographic as opposed to what is the photograph? So I think that there are several moments within the history of this perpetually changing medium, the photographic medium, where we have experienced, not to the degree that we are today, of billions of images, but we have experienced similar situations. And that was in the 1920s with the advent of the, lightweight 35 millimeter camera. It was a Leica first, but there were many others, perforated film, with the wide angle lens and the flash bulb, all of these elements, wide aperture, right, that allowed photographers to take pictures much more rapidly in more quantities. And also, it's very interesting, but it created a very more dynamic mode of image production, which was linked to montage. And so you have that in 1924 already, which leads to, for instance, such social theorists as Siegfried Kracauer to talk about the notion of a blizzard of images. So at that time, they were experiencing something similar to what we do today. And then in 1983, just a few years before the launching of the World Wide Web, the Brazilian-Czech theorist Willem Flusser talks about two paradigmatic shifts in the history of mankind since its beginnings. One being in the second half of the second millennium of the Common Era, the invention of linear writing. And the second one, something that we are experiencing right now, is the birth of technical images, meaning photography, film, and the rest. So with this change from, the linearity of writing to this much more dynamic mode of image production, I think that our own way of experiencing and understanding reality, the word, what the word is, how we experience it, has changed. And that is in function also of technological apparatuses such as the camera, the lens, the scanner, all the various means that the artists in this exhibition are using.
Could we speak about a few of the photographers, of the artists who are included in the show? Maybe highlight something that you like, and of course, without giving names, maybe a piece that you considered but just didn't quite fit or didn't work, and also maybe if there's one of the pieces that is an outlier from the rest of the group.
I cannot give you the second one or someone who didn't fit because, there are 90 artists who didn't fit, and that has to do with how a process of selection goes for making a particular exhibition,
Of course, yeah.
It seems to me that the idea of finding a photographer that would fit when you're trying to talk about putting together a show of an expansive quality and parameters of work seems like an odd juxtaposition to say, someone who just didn't fit to something that's supposed to be kind of open and experimental.
Well, it's...
Where do you draw the line? That's kind of tough one, I think.
It's not that they weren't fitting necessarily. We were looking at a very broad group of people that we are interested in their work and that we are continuing to follow in what they are doing. And by the way that we do research for these exhibitions is so varied. It can go from not knowing about someone and seeing it on the Instagram and then going and doing serious scholarly research about it to doing studio visits in the respective countries where these people are, whether it's Egypt, Angola, various countries in Europe or the United States, And this is the case. I mean, with all the artists that were included in this exhibition, we conducted an individual studio visit, had seen the work, whether it was digital or not. We could have just experienced it on a digital format. We did see it in person.
Are any of the artists out and out new, as in the sense this may be one of their first major
Of course, there are many artists. There are artists who don't have representation in New York, who were never shown in New York, for instance. Some of them who are very emerging in the field. Kachanoviskova and Marina Pinsky are two artists who never, they didn't have a representation in New York, and now they do.
Mm-hmm. Can you describe their pieces?
Well, Kachanoviskova has she has the cutout photographic pieces, which in fact are both included in the Edward Steichen photo galleries and were included until very recently in the Agnes Gant sculpture lobby. So it sort of broke out of the space of the photo galleries also in different other spaces.
That's a big deal for this show too. You guys are utilizing spaces that you've never used before. Is that true?
Yes, we are. And the Bauhaus staircase is another one. That's another artist who's never shown in New York, Katharina Gansler. Her piece involves thousands of picturs that she took in different locations at the Bauhaus, the famous Weimar School in Dessau, and very specifically the Bauhaus staircase that was built by Walter Gropius. She shot also at the museum on our own Bauhaus staircase, and also she photographed details of the Bauhaus stairway from two paintings in the Museum of Modern Art's collection, which are Oskar Schlemmer, Bauhaus Stairway from 1932, and also Roy Lichtenstein's piece by the same name from 1988. Then sort of deconstructed and reconstructed through all these pictures a mosaic that brings together all this representation of the Bauhaus staircase. And this is a site-specific installation that was done within our own Bauhaus staircase and that will be dismantled and destroyed at the end of the exhibition. What remains is eventually a photo book that she's making after each ephemeral installation.
Is there one piece that has really been the standout in terms of commentary?
Depending who you ask, there are different critics who are drawn and different publics who are drawn to different, works in the exhibition. I can tell you that Edson Chagas from Angola, whose work appears as a sort of takeaway poster, we ran out within the first week of thousands of posters that were on the floor and were taken away. That has to do with the circulation of images and how people take these mementos.
I actually wanted to ask about that. Are his photos normally displayed
no,
in
this
walls?
particular piece is displayed like that, but yeah, they are displayed also on the walls. Then, the newsstand, of course, is the reconstruction of an actual newsstand that was in Brooklyn at the Metropolitan Avenue stop, which we reconstructed exactly as it was, with also all the contents, all the ephemera and the zines, which is totally analog. It's not digital, but again, it has to do with distributive authorship, right? On how people communicate, and that's a very live, piece, because it is there are volunteers there who are making zines, exchanging hands with the public, and we have once a month also an event exactly as they had it in the subway station. And there is another piece which is done by the collective DIS, which was founded in 2010 as a curatorial collective, but they are also an artistic collective. They're going to curate the next Berlin Biennial. And it was a very interesting collaboration with them, because we were in early discussions, both curatorial and with our marketing team. So they created not only two large-scale installations within the galleries, but also pieces that exist online, posters outside in the city, and that took the 2014 Eurovision winner as the image for the exhibition, which is a very stunning, but it's also an image that went viral and the virality, this aspect of the title of the show, Ocean of Images, which has to do with not only with, obviously, the internet as a metaphor, but also with the idea of a site of piracy, that people appropriate images and manipulate and do something else with them, the idea of networks and information systems, but also what Jeff Wall once called liquid intelligence of photography. This notion that we were talking about before, that photography is in fact in constant flux, it's porous, it contaminates, other mediums. And this is the case with this exhibition.
Personally speaking, I could say that particular piece was the most engaging to me and most disturbing in many, many ways. I kept coming back to it just to watch it. We're going to take that topic about the oceans of imagery, the whole concept of ocean, in a moment when we come back with Steve.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. Send us a tweet at BHPhotoVideo, #BHPhotoPodcast.
One of the cooler things about growing up in New York City is that I had an opportunity to attend the High School of Art and Design, which is located about 5 blocks from MoMA. And back then, it wasn't unusual for us to slip out a side door and head off to MoMA to catch shows whenever something interesting came up. Over the years, I've seen many photography shows at MoMA, including John Zarkowski's New Documents exhibit in '67. And I saw the first new photography show back in 1985. I have little doubt that all of these shows have greatly affected the way I go about taking pictures to this very day. When I saw Ocean of Images last week, I was with Steve Mays, and I couldn't help but notice he was taking some very copious notes along the way. Let's hear what he has to say about the show.
Thank you. And what a fabulous and interesting description that was. Thank you, Roxana. You gave me a lot to think about there. I mean, first of all, I welcome any invitation from the modern to come and help myself to art. So I'll be looking at that. And I have to ask, B&H, do you have a camera obscura?
We have a 1200 millimeter Canon telephoto, and we do have a 16 by 20 view camera in the used department currently.
Okay, just checking.
That's close.
Well, no, I found the whole exhibition really stimulating and thought-provoking, and which I take to be really the primary function of a museum. It's not so much a collection as much as an impetus to be aware, to think, and to look. And I wanted to start with just a question about the title. I was interested that this is the first one that had a title, and the two key words there, Ocean of Images, raised questions for me, one of which is ocean obviously implies volume, and currently at the moment that discussion of volume is accompanied by a degree of anxiety. And images, I thought it interesting you weren't talking about photography. And listening to you talk, it explained a lot about how you're talking more about the photographic process rather than the photograph as such. But I was curious why the title and what was the logic behind choosing those words?
I think that one of the most interesting aspects of this exhibition, the points that it tries to bring together, is that with this 24/7, this incredible accumulation and of images that we witness constantly, to which we participate. I mean, we live in a telematic milieu all the time. We are constantly interacting, communicating, exchanging, downloading an image. Photography no longer really only represents or depicts the word, but rather constructs the word.
I only speak now in either emojis or photos.
Right.
There's nothing else I use. So.
Yeah. Well, the language itself has changed.
How does that go with the bank?
Not so well.
Okay.
Actually, with the bank, you take a picture of your check and you send it. They encourage me. They kind of kick me out the door and say, use your phone now.
I love also that you reference Willem Flusser, who I think is fascinating. And of course, he talked about the quantum image, this notion of the image existing in contradictory states simultaneously. And impossible contradictions. And that to me was really my big takeaway from the exhibit. For me, it was full of contradictions. You were talking there about the relationship between the word and the image, and that was one of my starting points, was that every image or every series of images is accompanied by a fairly extensive wall text. And I left the gallery wondering what the exhibit would have been like without the words. And therefore, what was the purpose of the words? And that sometimes the words were describing, and they were also analyzing. But that notion of the picture having to coexist with words was one of the first questions which came up for me.
Well, we try to leave it a little descriptive for the labels in order not to be the only voice of interpretation to the viewer, to allow the viewer to bring their own views to the work. But maybe it had to do also with the fact that there were so many, in fact, artists that were new, that were not known to the general public and even to the specialized one. It also had to do with the fact that when on the 30th anniversary of New Photography, we wanted to make a publication. And we never made even a brochure. We never published anything in conjunction with the New Photography series. So we wanted to do a book, and then when we talked to our publisher, they thought, well, actually, what you are missing is the entire history of photography. So instead of doing just a book on New Photography as a series, we kind of engage ourselves with a much more ambitious project, which is a 3-volume publication on the history of photography at the Museum of Modern Art. And in order to, in fact, coincide with the opening of the show back in November, we published the 3rd volume. So we are publishing them in reverse, starting with the more recent work. So the 3rd volume is 1960 to today. And that's because that volume incorporates, features some over 40 artists that were included in the New Photography series before. And now we are working on the 2nd volume, which will be coming, is the 1920s to 60s, which is coming back this November, and then we'll go to the 19th century for the following year.
The prequels.
Yes, exactly. So, we this need to also provide a little bit more information stemmed from the fact that we wanted this edition to be broader, to be more grounded. The fact that now we don't need to just feature new artists but rather to provide more of a point of view, more of a context of how these artists function within the larger history of photography and of art was a more compelling need at this given moment in time.
One of the contradictions in the show was that it is fixed. It's on the walls and on the floor of the modern, and that to me seemed really contradictory with the nature of photography at the moment. I have to say, I was delighted when you said that that one of your pieces is going to be destroyed at the end of it, because part of what we're, not because I don't like it, but part of what the real experience of imagery at the moment is its transience. Right. We live in it as a stream rather than as a pool. It's constantly flowing, and this notion of images coming, images going is really very expressive. And I love that the modern should be doing that, as just showing for a second or a few weeks. A piece of work. But the contradictions to me were that photography is fluid. It is quantum. It does exist all the time in different forms, at different moments, to different people, simultaneously. And yet here we are in the museum. It's the conventional white wall box with images fixed, albeit some are in a loose stack that you can take off. But it's a fixed installation, and this notion of an installation seems very contradictory with the essence of what you're even saying, let alone what's actually happening in photography at the moment. It's isolated from daily experience. It's fixed in time and space. It will end. It's here. It's in this location at this moment. And it's tethered to text. It struck me that all the ideas you're talking about were very difficult to express in the actual exhibit. And I wondered, if you how you wrestle with that, because, as you say, there's no particular online session for it. It's just, it does exist as a physical show.
It's true that I read online a lot, but I also read books and magazines today. And there is something about the objecthood of works that are driven by the photographic. And again, I get back to the photographic because it's a difference between the photograph and the photographic. And I think that this exhibition, while it happens in the galleries, it takes on many, many forms. Some of them are projections, some of them morph into three-dimensional installations, some of them are just a map-like. Some are takeaways that will disappear. Some of them are ephemeral installations.
I saw that particularly, the thing with the Mishka Hanna piece,
Yes.
which manifests in the
Yes.
gallery in three forms.
Yes,
And Mishka
exactly.
produced a book.
Yes.
Which is essentially a data visualization piece,
Right.
which is really interesting.
Yes.
It's a fabulous piece of work. And yet in the gallery, it exists as a book, as a video, and as a text.
Correct.
And I wondered, is there something wrong with the book that...
Yeah, you can't, but the book is not available to touch. It's behind glass.
I think that Mishka did the video expressly to show how many black pages you'll have. How do you kind of even understand distance, but also to defy the rational Cartesian kind of understanding of encyclopedias, which provide knowledge, right? Knowledge gathering. That goes page after page after page that is just black. There is another piece I should mention that, in fact, first of all, this started as a marketing campaign, publicity campaign. The group started as a lifestyle magazine and then branched out in various other directions. But this exists, contributed not only a piece for the gallery, but numerous other pieces, some that exist online, some that of them are on throughout the city. They are dispersed. You have to find them. You have to know about it. There is no text. So it's up to viewers who encounter them. And then there is David Horvitz's piece, which is quite exceptional because that is
Is that mood disorder? Is this one?
Mood disorder,
yeah,
yes,
I love that,
which exists online. This is a piece that exists online. We also have a representation in the gallery, but it continues to exist online. It's viral. It will never disappear. So this is a photograph of the artist that he took himself, a picture, a self-portrait of him with his head in his hands. And then that picture, he downloaded it on Wikipedia to the site of mood disorders. Within instance, it became viral. It was picked up by various other sharing sites and accepted as de facto.
David Horvitz's piece was one which attracted my attention, and there's some in a way wry amusement because it's essentially what he's analysing there is a phenomenon which has existed for decades, actually pre-internet as well, where part of my career I spent working in photographic stock, which is where a library provides an image for commercial use, and the images we would provide in those days on transparency and were then printed would appear in countless representations all around the world with different meanings and different attributions and context around it. And it struck me, it's quite interesting that here we have David Horvitz in 2015, 2016, essentially getting to grips with a process which has been around for a very long time of recontextualizing the image. And in a sense, that represented a lot of where we're at the moment, which is a certain sort of insecurity. We are reviewing what is photography, what is... where are we in all of this? What does it mean? And of course, not just in the museum, but in culture at large, we're all struggling to figure out what do we do with all these pictures and what's its significance in my life and all the rest of it. And David, I think, sort of got right to the point there because he took something which has been around for a long time and made it very specific to one image and just drew out all the contradictions and richness of that. It was also, I felt, somewhat forlorn. There's sort of like this sort of forlorn ego searching for presence on the internet. It sort of raised the figure.
I noticed. I checked Wikipedia last night. Mood disorder. The image is not there any longer. I don't know if that means anything.
Yeah, it was brought down, but it was picked up by many other
yeah.
sites, and as you can see it in the exhibition, by various forums and blogs, and it continues to be. This is just a book that he made up to the opening of the show.
I felt that one spoke to the working photographer who were also kind of worried about our work getting taken from us.
But this mutability of meaning of stock photography, it's something that so many artists now are coming to grips, and they are investing in it, and they are doing something
Well,
you know.
I think it's great because it's actually something we should talk about a separate time. Maybe it's the next podcast. But I think stock is a hugely overlooked and powerful cultural force. That insecurity, I mean, to me, was somewhat measured in the title as the reference to quantity in the ocean. There is a certain anxiety in that. I felt with a lot of the wall text were very wrapped up in process. It's and there seems to be this constant search that we're all on to find relevance and to understand where we exist in this now hugely expanded media universe that we exist in. And that I thought was one of my key takeaways from the show, and to me linked it very much to from the rarefied walls of the MoMA to daily life is this sort of insecurity about what is it that we're dealing with. Is my cell phone part of my practice?
Right.
It's all these questions.
Yes.
Is my sister-in-law a photographer because she makes pictures and stuff? All these kind of questions come up.
Does she consider herself a photographer?
Absolutely not. And I was interested. My friends over at Instagram, have told me that photographers account for a very, very, very small percentage of Instagram users. Yeah,
it's very true. Like I am following a few of them who are quite fantastic on Instagram. Like Stephen Shore, for instance, or Dianita Singh, or Collier Shore, Wolfgang Tillmans.
Well, that kind of leads me to a question, and I know we have to wrap up soon, but this worrisome nature that we're speaking about images, do you think a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old is worried about the fact that there's so many images out there right now?
No, of course not. And I think the emergence of Snapchat is really fascinating. This medium which vanishes, the images vanish in so many seconds. No, and I think that it's the general anxiety about the volume of images. I think is hugely misplaced. It's just that I feel that we've come into the age of the photographic. I think we're just arriving there after 180 years, or whatever it is that we've been practicing. And that it's now just in the medium of communication. As you said, you express yourself in images. People speak in imagery now, which is fantastic. We have a tremendously visually literate culture, not only representational, but people are talking about ideas in pictures. And this to me is just so fantastic. And
it goes to prehistory. I mean, how were people communicating in caves through pictograms, right?
It was kind of interesting, but difference, apart from electricity, was there was also a permanence to that. And to me, the analogy is really like words. I mean, when I talk about the relationship between words and image, I think there's also another level of relevance, which is that pictures are now like words. There's gazillions of them out there. Nobody counts them. Nobody wonders how many words are published every day, but somebody is counting the pictures uploaded online. There's this sort of anxiety about, oh my God, 2 billion pictures, we're going to drown. And it's not true. And we know that, like words, some words are swear words and you just utter them and throw them away. And some words are poetry and you want to treasure it and protect it and you know where to go to find it. So I don't think that anxiety exists out there. People just speak in photography.
Thank you, Roxanne. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, John Harris, my producer and co-pilot, and thank you, Jason Tables, our engineer. Give us your opinions on Twitter at BHPhotoVideo with the hashtag BHPhotoPodcast. And please leave a review on iTunes. We would appreciate it. My name is Alan Weitz. Thank you so much for tuning in today.